Welcome to K6 Wellness Revolution, where we believe health is worth fighting for. This podcast focuses on all things related to natural health, wellness, and vibrant living. We know your time is valuable, and I'm honored that you're spending some of it here. So get ready, because the Wellness Revolution starts right now. Welcome to the K6 Wellness Revolution podcast. I'm Sharon, traditional naturopath and family nurse practitioner at K6 Wellness Center in Dallas, Texas, where we blend trusted expertise, compassionate care, and a passion for helping you achieve optimal health. Because wellness isn't just a goal, it's a revolution. And today we're talking about diabetes and how functional medicine goes beyond just your blood glucose and your A1C, but we're focusing on what's driving your blood sugar issues and how to truly restore metabolic balance. With the knowledge and the tools we have, we work to empower our clients to reverse prediabetes and type 2 diabetes, ultimately optimizing long-term metabolic health. And why do we care about controlling blood sugar? Because you can't be a high performer with uncontrolled blood sugar, and it becomes very difficult to maintain basic daily activities and function when glucose regulation's broken.
Well, and this is where I love to just jump in and say, hey, we have to talk about diabetes. But first of all, I think we need to understand some statistics around it to fully appreciate the importance as well as the prevalence. I mean, wouldn't you agree? According to the CDC, more than 38 million Americans have diabetes. That's about 1 in 10. And about 90 to 95% of that number has type 2 diabetes. And, type 2 diabetes most often develops in people 45 or older, but more and more children, teens, and young adults are developing it. Now, type 1 is an autoimmune condition, which is completely different disease process. And as such, it's an entirely different conversation. Because type 2 is a metabolic dysfunction. And it's typically brought on by diet and lifestyle, sometimes genetics. But this is usually completely preventable. If left unchecked, type 2 diabetes could lead to type 3 diabetes, which is what dementia is becoming known as. And furthermore, diabetic patients often have numerous complications that can be quite debilitating, from neuropathy to blindness, non-traumatic amputations, and chronic kidney failure. And in fact, diabetes is the leading cause of kidney disease. They call it diabetic kidney disease. And that's just the most basic statistics around type 2. So Sharon, why don't you break down what that cost is to us, like literally speaking?
Yeah. The total cost of type 2 diabetes in the U.S. was an estimated almost $413 billion, including both direct medical care costs, which was like $306.6 billion, and then indirect costs like lost work or lost productivity, which was another $106.3 billion. And then individuals with diagnosed diabetes usually take on an annual medical expenditure cost of around $19,736 on average. Now, that is 2.5 times higher than people without diabetes. And roughly $12,022 of that cost is diabetes related. So lifetime direct medical costs, which are largely driven by complications from diabetes, can range from $54,700 to over $130,000, depending on your age when you're diagnosed and your gender. And this is, those are big numbers. And I think the thing that bugs me is, as a person who looks to save money on healthcare costs, because I prefer to spend my money on healthy food. I like to spend my money on physical activities. I really think that as a nation, and with a largely broken healthcare system, I hope you're listening, RFK. I think that if we put money towards healthy food and active lifestyles or gym memberships, the impact that could make on our healthcare costs, from or direct medical costs could go down. Like if you're diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, hey, here's a year's gym membership, and like a monthly training, physical trainer appointment, or we're going to require you to meet with a nutritionist once a month, or because you don't get any of that. And I just think that the way that we spend money or what's required of patients because of ignorance and negligence within the healthcare system with regard to education and truly empowering patients with diabetes to know how to take care of themselves, it's staggering. I think it's absolutely staggering. And yeah, that's my soapbox.
Well, and this is where conventional medicine kind of fails because they often focus on symptom management, like
Mhm.
glucose control, rather than looking at the root cause. Because, Western medicine, it's built around treating acute illness and injury. If there's infections, trauma, heart attacks, etc. And in those situations, the goal is to stabilize symptoms quickly. And they're good at that. Stop the bleeding, lower blood sugar, control infection. And this model was extremely successful in reducing mortality, but it doesn't translate perfectly to chronic lifestyle driven conditions such as diabetes or even hypertension, which do require long term behavior and metabolic change.
Well, most medical research and pharmaceutical development are structured around measurable short term outcomes, as we know.
Mhm.
Like, how much can we lower your A1C or your blood pressure or your cholesterol levels? Because these things are easy to measure, they're easy to quantify. It's easier to get FDA approval for interventions that correct these types of things. And whereas interventions that correct lifestyle errors like nutrition, sleep, toxin exposure, those are harder to standardize. They're hard to test for, and it's way less profitable to study because you know what? To fix those things, you're not going to have a patentable product that you're using. And there's definitely not going to be a billable procedure because you can't cut it and you can't drug it.
Mhm.
And the US healthcare system and similar ones elsewhere in the world, they only reimburse providers for procedures, prescriptions, lab tests, not time spent with patients on lifestyle counseling or stress management or prevention of disease. It's very little reimbursement for that. And as a result, the system is basically incentivizing managing disease progression rather than reversing it or preventing it in the first place.
Well, and even some patients, they may be told to eat better and exercise, but they don't get real guidance on how to change their biology. And this makes me crazy because everyone's not the same and it's not going to be the same for everybody. You cannot expect the same level of compliance from everyone, age, gender, weight, but when you consider that most healthcare providers have not even been trained in nutrition and exercise, this is a serious deficit of lifestyle intervention education across the board. And there are lots of functional medicine practices, but insurance, usually isn't going to cover services that involve dietary and lifestyle counseling because so much of that is we're having the person do the work. There's not a whole lot for us to make off of that. We're here to give you the guidance, but you have to do the work. And most people, they don't want to spend the money on it or do the work. But aside from that, there's a lot of factors that drive diabetes. So I feel like we should dive into some of that because once you learn things that can drive it or control blood sugar, there's things that are outside of your control. And let's talk about some of those things, like some things you can control, some things you can't.
Right. Right. Some of the underlying drivers in diabetes, first of all, we always hear insulin resistance, right? And this happens when the body's cells become less responsive or sensitive, if you will, to the effects of the hormone insulin. And insulin is what helps move glucose from your bloodstream into cells so that they can use it for energy. So to compensate for this resistance to insulin, the pancreas will then create more insulin. It's kind of like when your kids don't listen to you, you just raise your voice, say more words. um, so this just leads to more insulin in circulation in the bloodstream and even less response by the cells. And there are some serious behavioral factors that help drive insulin resistance, like excess calorie intake. And that can, of course, lead to weight gain. And then you're going to have more visceral fat. And visceral fat is fat around your abdomen, and it's around your abdominal organs as well. And that fat that you have around your abdominal organs, it releases inflammatory molecules and free fatty acids that actually interfere with the signaling from insulin. So that's, more problems with your body's cells being sensitive to insulin and being able to use glucose for fuel. And then, eating a diet that's really high in refined carbohydrates and sugars, that would be like sodas, fruit juices, sugary drinks. Sports drinks are a big one. Low fiber foods, that's refined carbohydrates, or snack foods like granola bars. I always think of anything that has zero fiber on the label. That causes spikes in blood glucose and insulin all the time. And over time, it's going to lead to insulin fatigue in your cells. And that's where the receptors for insulin are they're like, ugh, enough already. I'm so sick of this insulin. I don't want to listen to it anymore. And you're so resistant to insulin. There's just no response. But when you eat a diet's high in fiber, then you're going to remain more sensitive or perked up and able to respond to insulin. But then there are things too, like lack of physical activity that leads to less muscle tissue. And muscle tissue is one of the main sites for glucose getting dumped off. So unfortunately, the less muscle you have, the more glucose you have floating around, and then the more insulin your body has to produce. So it becomes this very cyclical problem, of course. And that's, all contributing to the whole insulin resistance, all of those things.
Well, and then there's chronic inflammation, and you can get that from lack of physical activity or a diet that's high in refined carbs and sugar. But there's also toxic exposures that can drive inflammation, because when you've got different toxins, it could be heavy metals, it could be molds, it could be any number of things that disrupt your metabolic balance. You're going to have inflammation, oxidative stress, poor methylation, and all of these things are going to distract and exacerbate blood sugar regulation. So it's helpful to understand what these exposures are so you can correct the lifestyle or the habits that contribute to those exposures, because you can't out-medicate a lifestyle that's metabolically toxic. You're going to get an inflammatory storm from, cytokines like TNF alpha and interleukin 6 that can block insulin signaling pathways. So we really want to work to reduce the things that are causing that inflammation. A big thing that plays into this is sleep. Sleep deprivation and stress will drive up all your stress hormones, which will also raise blood sugar and promote fat storage. High cortisol levels, they just antagonize insulin's actions, which will make your insulin resistance worse. But then, your mitochondria, they've got to have support. They've got to have energy. And this, that's your cells' energy producers. If they don't work efficiently, cells have less capacity to burn glucose and fat properly.
Yeah, that's true. And metabolism is connected to gut health. You cannot separate those two things.
Mm-hmm.
Nutrient absorption, there's this whole idea that regarding gut health, you're only as healthy as what you absorb. And that was a little adage that was kind of taken from your gut health is only as good as what you digest.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was like, no, you're only as healthy as what you absorb. Nutrient absorption is allows you to get amino acids, vitamins, minerals, everything that's needed for a healthy mitochondrial function and hormone production. Short chain fatty acids created in the large intestine reduce inflammation and help improve insulin sensitivity. And along those lines, gut microbes influence how your body processes carbohydrates and fats and how sensitive your cells are to insulin. And then your gut and liver work together to metabolize and eliminate hormones, not just sex hormones, but also thyroid hormones and adrenal hormones like cortisol, the ones that affect your metabolism.
And, like you said, it's only as good as what you eat, but even more what you absorb. So some of that is in a person's control. Some is not when there's things in your food you aren't aware of, but that's where education and making the best choices comes in. And then there's the genetic components. Diabetes does tend to run in families, but there's also the epigenetics part. And that's the things that your body is exposed to and experiences that turn on those genes. And, that can be a driving factor more than anything, because even if you have a genetic predisposition to diabetes, what are you doing to load the gun and pull the trigger on that expression? And that's when it's important. We got to look at the specific genetic components to see, well, how can we properly support the body if there is a problem, and how do we properly support it to prevent a problem?
Yes, that's absolutely right. So you can't get out of a lifestyle of bad habits, right? Like you can't just say, I'm going to do this test and I'm going to do that test and I'm going to then go eat this sugary meal and drive through the fast food and whatever. There's no therapy and testing and whatever. I always tell people you can't out test a lifestyle of bad habits because there's no therapy and testing, but it is good information to get. But you can test to get direction to get out of your lifestyle of bad habits. And there are a lot of different tests that you could consider when dealing with metabolic health. But they're not all just these standalone tests. You need to look at multiple aspects. Otherwise, you may get an incomplete or an incorrect picture. For example, fasting blood glucose. That is too easily influenced by what you had for dessert last night, or did you have a glass of wine, or how stressed out are you about having a needle stuck in your arm this morning to have your blood drawn. That can all influence your fasting blood glucose. And then your A1C, that number is measuring an average of the life cycle of a red blood cell, so like 96 to 120 days basically. So if your glucose is bouncing around, it could be hard to tell exactly where the long-term glucose use really is, but you can get a decent average if there have been super high and super lows. So fasting insulin, we like to look at this. A lot of medical doctors don't look at this, but in the interest of metabolic flexibility, I want to know that we're not building insulin resistance. So I really like to see a fasting insulin below 4. Clinically, I think the range is usually like 2 to 21 is acceptable. And then so you hit 22 or 25 and now you're insulin resistant. But you're getting close to there long before you hit 20, or 22 or 25 or whatever the range may say. But when you're insulin sensitive, then we know that your body is actually more flexible with regard to what it can do with carbohydrates and with fat, what it's using as fuel. So fasting insulin can be a useful measurement tool.
Well, and another useful tool is a continuous glucose monitor. Those devices you wear 24/7, because it will show you what your blood sugar is doing in real time. And I find it often has shocking results. Everyone's so different. Therefore, certain foods or certain things are going to make it spike, and it could be from unsuspecting sources. I think it's also great for people to see what happens to your blood sugar when you consume sugars and carbs in the wrong amounts or the wrong combination or simply at the wrong time of day. It can also explain why some people have this burst of energy and then they're suddenly so tired and they have this really low spell. What is the glucose doing?
Mm-hmm. And then there's lipid particle testing. So a lot of people get hung up on their cholesterol and their LDL, and oh no, my LDL is 105 and it's supposed to be under 100. Am I going to die? Do I need a statin drug? And without going down that rabbit hole, I want to be clear about one thing. You need cholesterol to make hormones. We truly believe that there is so much misinformation surrounding cholesterol, and 99% of it comes from mainstream medicine. So while we look at lipids with a different functional lens, it is always worth tracking and knowing your lipids and particle testing to better understand what your body is doing. So, with regard to LDL or low density lipoproteins, you can look to see, do you have, large particle sizes? Are you dealing with large numbers of small particle sizes, which are more oxidized and going to be a little more dangerous with regard to plaquing or atherosclerosis? So that is a valuable test for people who may be more predisposed to cardiovascular disease or determining whether you are. And then there's C-reactive protein and iron and ferritin and homocysteine. And these numbers are indicative of overall inflammation levels, but they're also nutrient tests. And nutrient panels test for zinc, copper, B12. All of these things can give direction for cellular deficiencies that can impact your inflammation and ultimately your blood sugar numbers. But also, I think it's important to understand that, like C-reactive protein, it is a type of systemic inflammation. It is not singularly correlated with one type of inflammation, and it does not mean that you're going to be diagnosed with any one disease, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, arthritis, but it is inflammation in the system. It shouldn't be ignored. Iron and ferritin can be also indicative of inflammation and stress, right? It can also be indicative of nutrient overloads and deficiencies. And when you have iron issues, there could also be zinc and copper issues. And so this is why it's important to work with practitioners who understand nutrition and can help guide you in that direction. Same thing with homocysteine. Homocysteine is going to be important to understand. If your levels are too high, then we know, hey, B12, folate, there are going to be some other things that you probably need to pay attention to for the sake of your cardiovascular health and your metabolic health. And then there's genetic testing. Genetic testing is a really helpful component simply to understand what tools are going to be best to help your body prevent and reverse metabolic imbalances in regard to glucose and insulin. And so we have genetic testing that we do here, and it just helps give people great information about dietary and lifestyle factors that they can use to build out the best plan for preventing.
And, if relevant, there's gut microbiome testing because it's helpful to know if you have endotoxins, particularly lipopolysaccharides, LPS, because they can have a very negative impact on your blood sugar, which can also contribute to insulin resistance. Because when you have gut permeability, aka leaky gut, it's a trendy word, right? This allows toxins to get into your blood that can cause these gram-negative bacteria to proliferate. And the bad bugs, they're going to always drive sugar and carb cravings, which then stresses your glucose and insulin functions. And it can seem like an endless struggle with your blood sugar if you don't get to the heart of this and understand what microbe imbalances could be driving this sensitivity. When you have a healthy mucosal lining in your gut, a mucosal layer in your gut lining, you're healthy. You've got tight junctions in that cell wall. And the LPS cannot migrate to other cells and organs in the body. Therefore, measuring those LPS antibodies, along with other microbes in leaky gut testing, can give us indications as to how strong or weak your gut lining is and how diverse your microbes are.
You want those microbes staying where they're supposed to stay.
Exactly.
For sure. But let's talk about interventions. Okay. So, nutrition with diabetes, nutrition is so important. It's not how many supplements can we get a person to swallow in a day, but the food that you eat is either going to be the poison or the cure. And I think it's important to notice that the food that you eat is, yes, it's important. And I do not want anyone to walk away from this podcast today thinking that carbohydrates are the devil just because you have diabetes. But it's also important to understand that all carbs are not created equal. And that's just so important to understand before we go any further. And especially women out there, prior to 2023, women really have not been included in medical research studies. So I kind of get haughty about, bro science with regard to diets. Because the whole idea of like intermittent fasting, it really depends on what season of life you're in as to whether it works for you and how well it works for you. And low carb, no carb, time restricted eating, carnivore, whatever, Mediterranean. Again, it's going to be different for different people. So, what works for a 25-year-old man is probably not going to work so great for a 65-year-old woman. And I think we just have to be open and flexible to trying things out and trying it for a little while and seeing how it feels. But personalized nutrition is so important. And so for us, when we work with people, we want to understand, what we want to understand what's going to be the best nutrition for them. So I have some people who need to eat veggie or plant heavy. And then there are other people who need so much protein or fat. And you know what? We're going to find a plan that works for every one of them. But across the board, the most common recipe for success is to simply include healthy animal proteins and plant fiber at every meal, but it's going to be in different amounts for different people. And so it's important to understand the role of protein and fiber and healthy fats. Protein is what keeps your metabolism busy, and it keeps it busy longer than anything else. So because of that, it keeps your blood sugar steady, while fiber kind of helps sweep out the trash, as well as feeding your microbiome, which when you hear microbiome, I just want you to think of all the bugs in your guts. It's part of your immune system as well. But then healthy fats also that feeds your brain, but it gives your body an alternative to glucose for fuel. And when you have balanced glucose levels, you're going to have steady energy and you're going to have fewer cravings as you go through your day. And in general, you're going to want to have protein at your first meal of the day. And pretty good amount of protein for most people, like 20 to 30 grams. There will be some exceptions to this, but in general, most people don't get this. And though, well, the people who don't get this are the people who are not steady with their blood sugar. And I would say also you need to include fiber and healthy fats at each meal. And it doesn't have to be like copious amounts of any one thing. But also if you are one of these people, if you're diabetic or if you do not have good blood sugar regulation, you do need to avoid grazing. You want to let your body rest between meals. And when you include fiber and protein in every meal, you can do this successfully and you can keep your blood sugar balanced. But also, a really important thing to remember is that you need to reduce your ultra processed foods. And this is so much more important than counting calories. I mean, counting calories could just fall by the wayside if you just get rid of processed foods, because the stress that your body takes on from seed oils, it feeds all of those inflammation things like the C-reactive protein, your homocysteine, all of those inflammatory factors just go up, up, up. And that's always going to have a negative impact on your glucose levels. So you should focus on whole unprocessed foods, like use olive oil, use avocados. It's a great fat and fiber source. Nuts, omega-3 fats. That's what all of these are. Fermented foods. So kimchi, sauerkraut, even a little kombucha here and there. Even a daily probiotic for people who can take that. And not everybody can do that, but that supports gut balance. And it bears mentioning that when you eat is also important. If you eat late in the evening, even if it's a healthy food, it's going to cause increased blood glucose levels, which is going to make insulin resistance worse. And it could really disrupt your circadian rhythm, making sleep very iffy, right? For some people, intermittent fasting can really have a huge benefit on their glucose control, and it will improve their sleep. But not everybody. It's just worth trying, right? Because some people just find that they have to eat breakfast. And much like how we work to figure out what types of foods you need to be eating, you also need to figure out like when you want to be eating those foods. And it's not always the same for everybody.
Sleep won't be the same for any two people either. However, everyone does need quality sleep. Because you mentioned sleep, you have to have that for your body to be able to regulate the circadian rhythm, repair itself, and have healthy insulin and glucose balance. And unless you're someone who struggles with low blood sugar, I'm glad you said that when you eat's important. You don't need to be eating before bed. You've got to have a healthy window and a break when you sleep, so you're not digesting food. But, I love it when some people say, I don't need that much sleep. Well, you do. Everyone does. Because your body's going to heal at night. So how do you get that good sleep? We talk about sleep a lot because it is just that important. And it's pretty simple. Just create an environment that is dark, it's quiet, it has a comfortable temperature, whatever that is to you. But then also help that circadian rhythm by getting morning sunlight within 30 minutes of waking. That's the ideal. We can't all do that, but as often as you can. Or, keep regular sleep times. That's just as important as regular eating times. You want it to be at the same time every morning and every night. And if you want really good sleep, limit the screens before bed. And, I think a lot of people think, oh, that's just not my problem. It's a problem for everyone because screens are going to interrupt your body's production of melatonin, which will then impact your body's ability to get deep sleep. And, avoid stress. Avoid stress before bed as much as you can. There's a lot of things we can't control, but you know what? Just try to be amiable before bed. Try not to have an argument. We say you try not to have it, or at least have it resolved, because you don't want that stress in your nervous system. I think it's important to also watch or be careful what you watch before bed. If you're watching an intense horror or suspense film or show, that's gonna, slow down your body's ability to wind down. So just avoid the stress when you can. But also practice slow breathing, prayer, journaling, meditation, things that downregulate the nervous system, that will help you relax, that will help you sleep. But also spending time in nature. We lose that one. That's one of the most basic things you can do. Get outside, not only enjoy the sunshine, enjoy the fresh air, enjoy movement, and just disconnect from all the stress. And sometimes, yes, that means putting your phone away, but make sleep a sacred time.
Yes. Okay. So we've talked about intervening in our quest to reverse diabetes or prevent diabetes through nutrition, through sleep, through stress management. We can't forget movement. And
Mm-mm.
there's such an emphasis that we need to put on moving after we eat. And it's funny because I know growing up, like we used to go on picnics, like we go to the water park and we'd eat, and my mom would be like, you got to sit down for 30 minutes. You can't go play for 30 minutes. And now, like you should eat and go for a walk, or you should get up and move around because it's so good for your metabolism. One of the best things you can do to have optimal blood sugar after a meal is go for a walk for 10 minutes. It prevents sharp spikes in your blood sugar. And even if you can't do like a big workout after you eat, I mean, it's not necessary. Just moving your body on a daily basis is a really big deal. Gentle movement does count. And that's a big, big thing. So even if it's not after a meal, making time for exercise through your day, mobility training, getting down in a deep squat, making sure ankle mobility, hip mobility is there, stretching, walking, it's all important. Strength does deserve some emphasis because muscle is your longevity organ. And so strength training like 2 to 3 times a week is really important. And really to build muscle, most experts recommend that you eat 1 gram of protein per pound of ideal body weight. And I think it's important to say that ideal body weight. If you weigh 300 pounds, you do not need 300 grams of protein, because chances are 300 pounds is not your ideal body weight. Maybe 150 pounds is your ideal body weight. Maybe it's different, but it's 1 gram of protein for your ideal body weight, per pound of ideal body weight. And then, include functional exercises in your exercise regimen, like squats, pulls, carries, doing push-ups or plank, things like that.
And ultimately, nothing replaces nutrition, sleep, or movement. Those are foundational. So we definitely need to start with those. And I know, Sharon, that's how we both like to start with our clients. Like, you have to have that part down. But then there are some amazing targeted nutrients or supplements that we can use that we do need to use some time to come at it from that angle as well. And berberine, also known as nature's metformin, is probably the most commonly used one. And it's a powerful little pill. Studies show berberine can lower blood sugar levels in people with type 2 diabetes by improving insulin sensitivity, stimulating glycolysis, the breakdown of glucose, and decreasing glucose production in the liver. That's why it is sometimes compared to metformin. But, it goes beyond that. It can improve lipid profiles by lowering total cholesterol, triglycerides, and LDL, the bad cholesterol, while increasing HDL, the good cholesterol. It helps increase LDL receptor expression in the liver, which aids in removing excess cholesterol from the bloodstream. And then it also enhances metabolism through AMPK activation. And, berberine can contribute to modest weight loss by reducing fat storage and enhancing the fat burning. And it's also a natural antimicrobial when we talk about the microbiome. Berberine can help regulate that gut microbiome by inhibiting pathogenic bacteria and promoting the growth of beneficial species. We like to use this for things like H. pylori. It treats that digestive tract infection. But I love that while it helps with the blood sugar, it's also a broad anti-inflammatory. All this talk about inflammation and how that drives glucose and insulin dysfunction and oxidation. Berberine's an antioxidant, or it can help with the antioxidant activity in the body by helping to protect against cellular damage caused by that oxidative stress. And this is thought to benefit various diseases, including some cardiovascular and neurodegenerative conditions. So it's a multi-purpose nutrient and herb.
Alpha lipoic acid, too, is a really good antioxidant, and it helps protect cells from damage caused by free radicals. It works directly by quenching like ROSs or reactive oxidative species, and it can chelate metals that promote oxidative damage, and it helps regenerate other antioxidants like vitamin C, vitamin E, and glutathione. And it's unique because it's both fat soluble and water soluble, and it allows it to be effective in all parts of the cell. And it acts as a cofactor in the Krebs cycle, which is an important process for generating cellular energy. So, alpha lipoic acid also influences various cell signaling pathways, and it affects processes like metabolism, stress response, inflammation, and survival. And it's worth mentioning that alpha lipoic acid has two forms. There's the R lipoic acid and S lipoic acid. And they're mirror images of each other, but the R lipoic acid form is the one that's naturally produced in the body. So when you buy it as a supplement, you want to look for R lipoic acid. That's the one that is going to have better bioavailability. So if you're going to supplement with it, use the R lipoic acid form.
Well, and then another one is magnesium. It's one of the most common deficiencies in the modern world. Our soil is just completely deficient of it. And insulin and glucose are important regulators of magnesium metabolism. Intracellular magnesium plays a key role in regulating insulin action, insulin-mediated glucose uptake, and even vascular tone. So it's an important one and an easy one to supplement.
Yeah. Inositol it's called vitamin B8, but it's not really a vitamin, but it is a naturally produced sugar alcohol, and it plays a role in cell structure, but it also has an effect on chemical messaging pathways in your brain that can increase insulin sensitivity. And not only that, it's also thought to really help with sleep, especially for menopausal women. So there's that.
I mean, and so many of these have multiple benefits. Like D3, another big one, another huge deficiency in the world we live in, because we all spend too much time indoors. D3 can help regulate blood sugar by ultimately lowering inflammation. And that's going to improve insulin sensitivity. I'm sure we've gathered that much at this point. We've said that so many times because inflammation is key. But D3 can also help stimulate insulin secretion from the pancreas. So it's a helpful little tool and also another easy supplement.
Right. And let us not forget parasite cleansing, cleaning out the literal bugs that could be stealing your nutrients. And, helping to disrupt your glucose and insulin processes is also really important. When you clear the bugs out, you usually won't crave sugars and carbs as much, and it is important. And yes, even though we live in America, we do still get parasites. We are not immune to these. So it's an important thing to do, but it's something that I would encourage people to not get their advice for this off TikTok and Instagram from people who have no knowledge or training. You should really talk to somebody who knows what they're doing with this, because you can hurt yourself.
Yes. You got to be careful, know when to kill and what to kill with.
Yes.
But then there's also when to feed. We've talked a little bit earlier about probiotics, and I think people are pretty familiar with probiotics. They feed the good bugs, and you see them everywhere. But something a lot of people don't talk about very much are postbiotics, short chain fatty acids. These are bacterial metabolites, and it's one of my favorites because it is something that more people can tolerate. I know we've seen an increased sensitivity to probiotics because of histamine issues and other factors, but postbiotics help regulate the immune system because they reduce inflammation and improve the gut barrier. However, they're also amazing when it comes to blood sugar regulation because postbiotics help stimulate GLP-1. And, that's become a big topic lately. GLP-1s can regulate appetite by stimulating a feeling of fullness. And this can be great for people who struggle to get that full signal from the brain when they're eating. And we do see that a lot. And I don't think people realize that's a thing. There is self-discipline to know I need to stop eating, but there's some people who say, I never feel full. And so if you can get the support from postbiotics to help with that signal, it is going to help you make better choices when you eat. And, you get postbiotics from vegetables and fruit fibers. That's yet another reason why fiber is so important. And of course, you can use this in a supplement version like we do, but it's never going to replace the need for eating the right foods.
Yeah. And GLP-1s really have gained a lot of attention in recent years with the use of, certain pharmaceutical peptides. And peptides have shown great success in addressing metabolic health and insulin sensitivity and reversing, like A1C counts and stuff. But I'm not going to say it cures diabetes. And I don't think people say that at all. But definitely some are safer to use than others. The problem with these, and I've even had this conversation with pharmaceutical reps, and I frustrate them to no end because there's a distinct lack of education. They don't want you to lose your eligibility for the drugs. So you reaching your goal weight and improving your biomarkers is not in their interest. You are taking essentially a drug or a peptide hormone regulator or signaler that is going to slow your gastric emptying, and it should make you want to eat less. But if you're still eating garbage and you're not correcting these underlying issues that we talked about earlier, like you're not eating enough protein, you're not eating enough fiber, you're not getting the right kind of carbohydrates, you're not eating healthy fats, you're not moving your body, you're not handling your stress, you can take all the Ozempic and Wegovy and tirzepatide and, semaglutide, you can take all of it you want. You're never going to be healthy metabolically. And so it really, if you're on one of these drugs and you really want to be healthy, or if you don't ever want to be on one of these drugs and you want to be metabolically healthy, then you need to go back and listen again and write down these things that we've talked about. Because the mistake that people make is jumping on a bandwagon and, oh, this thing is going to make me better, or I'm going to do this one thing or whatever, but they never ever build a strong foundation. And I don't care what the super drug is or the wonder drug or the peptide, you have to have a foundation. And peptides are great. We love peptides. We use peptides. And there are different peptides for different uses and different problems. But we want to look at all the metabolic factors of each individual before we decide on one. But if you have diabetes and you want to be healthy, maybe a peptide is in order, but there are other things, I promise you, that are needed, because how many people out there know someone who got on a peptide or a pharmaceutical semaglutide or tirzepatide and they lost a ton of weight and then they got off of it and they put all that weight right back on. And it's because they never changed their behavior. They never built a strong foundation. And that's where functional medicine is different. That's why you want somebody who cares to go deeper and get to the underlying drivers, and let's make corrections that last.
We'll make corrections so these interventions can go further, because you can only get as far as, well, as far as you put the work in. But going back to, the gut microbiome we've talked about over and over again, gut health is key. GLP-1s aren't new. Our body makes them. Like, we get it from the foods we eat if you're eating the right healthy foods. You've got to have a healthy gut. It's the key to your immune system, neurotransmitter production, and ultimately every function in the body. And, we mentioned some of the things we can test for in regards to specific gut pathogens, but even without specific labs, we know for a fact, because research has confirmed over and over again, that the diversity of your gut microbes will determine your immune system and your body's ability to manage inflammation. So ultimately, the habits that make the biggest difference. Like, if you want one takeaway, prioritize protein at breakfast and vegetable fiber at every meal. That's protein and veggies at every meal. Walk for a few minutes after every meal. Sleep 7 to 8 hours consistently. Manage your stress intentionally. And track, don't guess your glucose. That is just so dangerous. And really take this information to heart, especially as we're going into the holiday season. It's a time where there are bad food choices and excess sugars and carbs everywhere. Just learn to have moderation and self-control so you can enjoy a life that is optimal and full of energy.
And if moderation and self-control are things that elude you because you've never been able to get there, that's where people like us can help you.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like some of, along that vein, some of the biggest misconceptions about diabetes are that it can't be reversed, because we see it all the time. We help people get there. Now, we're not saying we cure it, because when you reverse it, you're darn well going to be managing that the rest of your life, because your body has proven what it will do when you don't take care of it. And so you have to take care of it. And I think that, as far as like lifestyle changes, if you don't have diabetes yet, but maybe you got your first lab test back and you got pre-diabetes, don't wait another day. Stop the sugar yesterday and start walking after every meal today, and make sure that meal had some protein in it.
Mm-hmm.
That's really important. I think it's just really important that people live intentionally. It's so important that you don't go through life as a hapless, unwitting victim, thinking that, oh, this just happened to me. Because, so what if mom and dad had diabetes and all your aunts and uncles have diabetes? It doesn't mean it's inevitable for you. It is largely preventable. And in many cases, it is reversible. I think that it's just very important, if you have the benefit of early knowledge that, oh, this runs in my family, and I know that this is something I'm vulnerable for, then I'm going to keep checking my blood sugar, and I am going to start work now with a provider who gets to the root causes. And that's where, we can help you. So this is the perfect place to end our conversation today. Thank you for listening as we help you understand why blood sugar is important and how you can prevent the signs of insulin resistance and diabetes. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Follow us on Rumble, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram for more wellness content. If you'd like to book a consult with one of our practitioners, you can visit k6wellness.com to learn more or schedule a free discovery call. We're located in Dallas, Texas, but we work with people all over the world. Until next time, take care, be well, and as always, your health is worth fighting for.